So my sermon this morning is a question that occupied my children in our Shabbat table discussion, last night. It's a question I've asked before on the Parsha. This is where things start going wrong, Parashat Beha'alotekha. And so far, all we've read was how many Jews there are and how everybody is assigned a task and everybody is standing in a beautiful way around the temple, around the tabernacle, and everything looks great. And then a bunch of Jews, they start complaining. They begin to complain about the food that they miss from when they were in Egypt. The Torah says the riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving, and then the Israelites wept and said, Mi yachilenu basar. If only we had meat. And they keep going. Zacharnu et hadaga, not just the meat. We remember the fish. Asher nochal b'Mitzrayim, that we used to eat in Egypt. And we remember the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. Ve'ata nafshenu yevesha. And now we're sick of the same thing every day. What did they have every day? Ein kol bilti el haman einenu. We have nothing but this manna to look at. So in response to these complaints, Moses becomes despondent and is very, very frustrated, wants to quit, and God gets very angry too and strikes those who were complaining with a severe plague. One of the aspects of the manna that most people seem to know is quoted by Rashi on these verses. Rashi informs us that the manna was a magical food, that its taste changed. Mishtaneh hayat ta'amo. Its taste changed according to one's desire. And whatever you imagined that the manna could be, it's not clear if you could imagine a cheeseburger or pig ribs and it would suddenly become, that would be pretty cool. But whatever you would imagine the food to be, it would taste like. So some sort of a miraculous food. But it's an interpretation, of course, that creates a problem with the logic of the text. If the people were complaining that they missed the meat and the cucumbers and the garlic, well, they could have then just imagined that the manna that they were receiving would taste like those foods, and then their hunger, their cravings would be satisfied, right? It makes sense. So how do we logically understand Rashi's description of the manna as a magical food, which sounds amazing, with the people's complaints? So one of my kids said something interesting, and I think there's insight there, that when people are in a lousy mood, they find stuff to complain about, even when it makes no sense. And I think they were reflecting on their own behavior when they said that. That's a good answer. A couple of years ago, I asked this question, and there's a very beautiful Hasidic answer with an important moral. The people were not upset about the food. They were upset that everybody got the same thing. And it's our natural, competitive human desire to want more than our neighbor, especially that lousy neighbor. So when he gets the same amount of manna as you and the same exact food as you, it creates jealousy and disharmony, and it's not fair. Everybody wants a little bit more. But this morning I share an interesting insight from the Chidah. The Chidah is Rabbi Chaim David Azulai, an 18th century Israeli sage, and I think he gives a brilliant explanation based on a passage in the Talmud that says, one who sees the food and eats it cannot be compared to one who doesn't see the food and eats it. He writes that it's true, the manna could taste like whatever you wanted it to taste like, but it always looked the same. It's actually a brilliant explanation, because if you pay close attention to the text, the complaint of the Israelites was Ein kol bilti el haman einenu. Our eyes are tired of looking at the same manna. We have nothing but this manna to look at. I think this is brilliant. They weren't complaining about the way the manna tasted, and not about the fact that their neighbor got the same that they did. It might sound crazy at first, but they were complaining about the way it looked. If you have interacted with your children or grandchildren or any child at mealtime, I'm sorry, I'm throwing my children under the bus a lot during this sermon, but if you have interacted with children, you know that they first look very, very carefully at new foods that you're putting in front of them before they decide whether they're going to taste it or not. I have a kid, I won't tell you which one, but it's like a science experiment. He's examining every little aspect of the food that he's been given, and if I burn the hamburger a little bit, I have to shave that part off, and only then he'll take a bite. It doesn't matter if it's the finest food in the world. There's something within us that says if you don't like the way it looks, you don't eat it. We even have an expression in English, feast your eyes on this. I don't know if you've heard that expression before. What is someone saying when they're saying feast your eyes on this? They are understanding that just like our stomachs have an appetite, our eyes also have an appetite. In fact, companies spend millions and millions of dollars on food styling for advertising purposes. They want to make sure that the packaging looks good and the way it's presented looks good, and how it tastes is secondary. The first century Roman Apicius is attributed with the following quote, "We eat with our eyes first." No matter how wonderful the manna tasted, it looked unappealing, and that ruined it. I like this interpretation a lot, as I said, and I think it also explains why it was such a serious sin, deserving of such a serious punishment. It's not that people were complaining, it's not even what they were complaining about. It's the idea that our eyes can trick us. They can trick us. Our eyes can overpower our hunger. Our eyes can overpower our fears. Our eyes can overpower our security. Our eyes can overpower our ability to make rational decisions. And the Israelites let themselves be tricked. They disobeyed one of the most important commandments in Judaism, one that we will read next week in the Torah reading, but actually one that we read twice a day, every day. Velo taturu achrei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem. Be careful not to stray after your heart or your eyes, following your own sinful desires. When we use the phrase, feast your eyes on this, we're actually usually not talking about food. We could be talking about a graphic show on television, or a series that might be particularly designed to get your attention. We could be talking about magazines that purposefully airbrush pictures so that they look perfect and trick us into thinking how much better we could be or happier we could be if only we just did what the people in the magazines did or looked the way the people in the magazines looked. Our eyes are constantly feasting on things. They do have an appetite. And when we let our eyes control us instead of our morals, instead of our minds, instead of our intellects, it can actually be disastrous. The Bible tells the story of one such disaster in the book of Joshua. Just after the children of Israel conquer the city of Jericho and are about to conquer the city of Ai. Conquering the city of Ai should have been a very easy victory, but it turned out to be a disaster, and the inhabitants of Ai defeated the Israelites. Later, it was discovered why. I don't know if you've ever read this chapter of the book of Joshua. When the Israelites conquer Jericho, they are warned by God, don't touch the plunder. Leave everything there. Do not take anything that you conquer from the city. And after this terrible defeat at Ai, Achan, one of Joshua's soldiers, confesses and says, quote, "When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them, and I took them." One man and his eyes led to the defeat of the whole Israelite army. By the way, I did note that this all occurred in the city of Ai, but I don't think any pun was intended. We should not underestimate the importance of this commandment not to stray after the desires of our eyes. The Sefer HaChinuch, a 13th century moral work, which outlines all of the 613 commandments, enumerates every single one, explains every single one, says almost all of them really only apply to particular people in particular circumstances. There are only 6 of the 613 that apply to every Jew, every day, every second. And the 6th of those 6 constant mitzvot is not to stray after the desire of your eyes. To follow that commandment is to be constantly aware of the tricks and the pitfalls and the delicious manna that may not look perfect, that may be around you, and always to be vigilant. If he was saying this, the Sefer HaChinuch in the 13th century, imagine how much more so in the world we live in, which is addicted to sensory stimulation, where TV and radio and smartphones and billboards and internet are expertly designed to tap into our visceral drives, to get our attention. The natural inclination is to pursue these stimuli relentlessly. And there are few pieces of advice as prevalent in our culture as follow your heart or do whatever makes you happy. I couldn't think of any piece of advice more antithetical to Torah. What is interesting is that this commandment does not say don't follow after your eyes. It says velo taturu. Taturu, we'll learn that word in next week's Parsha, where spies were sent latur, to walk all over the place. The English translation I like best is don't stray. Straying is not following. The Torah is not saying don't ever follow your eyes. A stray dog is a lost dog. The Torah is saying, whenever you're pursuing something, whenever you're going after anything, you need clarity. You need to ask, what do I want? What do I need? Is this right for me? Is this good for me? The answers to those questions don't come from your eyes. They come from your mind, from logic, from your intellect. The way the manna tastes, the fact that it's delicious and it nourishes you, not the way that it looks, which is irrelevant. The Torah is saying, understand the direction that you need to go and then commit to it. Don't stray. You can have passion and you can have heart in everything that you're pursuing, but make sure that that pursuit has its foundation in reason. Much of the challenge, I think, of don't stray after your eyes is the test of ego. Human nature is to see ourselves as the center of everything. We think, my world, my accomplishments, my growth. But the Torah challenges us. We learn in Pirkei Avot, Aseh ritzono chirtzoncha, kedei she'ya'aseh ritzoncha kirtzono. Do God's will as if it were your will, and God will do your will as if it were His. Our purpose in this world is to try and attain that level of moral consciousness, that level of obedience to higher goods and higher truths. When we do the will of God, we are setting aside a lot, not just our eyes, not just our passions. In the world we live in, sadly, increasingly, people are losing friends because of moral and religious principles. People are losing jobs because of moral and religious principles. People are struggling financially because of moral and religious principles. It can be very difficult, and some people have given up, and I don't blame them. But I find inspiration in the sacrifices of previous generations who paid a much, much higher price for the religious commitments that they did not give up on. Our conduct today, the decisions we make, either disparages or sanctifies their martyred blood. Let's make sure it's the latter. To follow God is to commit ourselves to that which is objectively meaningful and good, and not to stray. And we are promised that if we stay true to that path, blessings will surely follow. Shabbat Shalom.